Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Katie Novak, and I am so excited to do this virtual presentation sharing Universal Design for Learning as a teaching and learning framework. You're going to learn in this presentation the power of universally designing our learning environments to ensure that every single learner, regardless of variability, has opportunities to master grade level standards and course objectives while affirming their identity as successful learners and building those expert learning muscles as they become more creative and resourceful and reflective. And here's the thing. Every single learner can be wildly successful when we get the conditions right. And Universal Design for Learning allows us to recognize what are some of the barriers in our design so that we can eliminate them so every single learner has equitable opportunities to learn, to feel like they belong, and of course, to feel hopeful that they will be successful. Now, you're going to find in this short presentation, there are some supplemental resources. And so I want you to reflect and think about what you need to get the most out of our time together. You will find a PDF document, and that will have a copy of the presentation that I'm about to put on my screen. Feel free to make a copy of it and take notes, translate it, do whatever you wish to do with it so that you can make meaning. You're also going to see that there's numerous visuals that correspond with additional resources that provide multiple means of representation so that you can learn more about some of the things you're learning by reading articles or listening to podcasts or watching videos. So feel free to dive in during the presentation or after the presentation to learn more. Finally, that document ends with some discussion questions that will allow you to work together with colleagues or reflect individually in whatever way works best for you to really think about what you have learned about your practice and what you want to do differently moving forward through the lens of universal design. So in just a moment, I'm going to share my screen and we're going to dive in, but just take a mindful minute here and think about what is the best thing for you right now to learn at high levels? And then we're going to dive right in. So here we are, and you're going to be learning about Universal Design for Learning as a teaching and learning framework. And the essential questions of our time together are, first of all, how do we design learning opportunities to ensure that all students have opportunities to be wildly successful? We also want to make sure that when we're being flexible through universal design, that we are ensuring that all pathways lead towards mastery. So we're going to talk about what it means to really be thoughtful and strategic about choosing pathways or working with our learners to create pathways so that they have options and choices for how they're learning, the materials they're using, and how they share what they know. And then we also want to talk about not only what our role is as educators and designers, but how we can scaffold expert learning in students so they can be more autonomous and more self-directed. Now, what you're going to learn about me is that I love analogies. So I'm going to be using a lot of them as we talk about universal design for learning. So what is UDL? What does that stand for? And the best way to explain this is just to imagine that we all together are going to attend a dinner party. And you are going to design that dinner party. And your goals are very, very firm and very clear. You are going to create a dinner party experience that allows every single person to fill their bellies with food that is delicious and that they can access, that meets their dietary needs. So you want to design a dinner party where everybody has a meal that is balanced and that they enjoy. So what are you not going to do? You are not going to serve my meme's tuna noodle wiggle. Now, you might not be familiar with this dish because all of us have so many different meals that bring us back to our come from place. My come from place is in Massachusetts in the United States of America. And my grandmother was French Canadian and she loved a good casserole. And this particular one had canned tuna fish, canned vegetables, lots of canned cream of mushroom soup with pasta, and sometimes she would even put potato chips or crackers on the top. Now, what is the problem with this casserole? For me, there is not a problem with this casserole because I love a meme's tuna noodle, but That is not going to work for everyone. It is not universally designed. Now, if you think about inviting a group of people over to your place to serve a meal, you would recognize that there is significant variability, and you would predict ahead of time that there's going to be some differences in what people can and will eat. So what's important for us is to really think about the goal. So if the goal is that everyone eats, I have to recognize the barriers of this casserole. And I say, oh my goodness, I might have some friends or loved ones who are lactose intolerant, and they wouldn't be able to eat tuna noodle because there is cream of mushroom soup and sour cream and cheese. And what about my friends who are vegan and vegetarian? They're not going to be able to access a lot of the meal. And what about people who are like, I don't even feel like I belong here. This is nothing that reminds me of my home or my come from place. And we recognize this. So when we have gatherings at our homes, we're often very, very proactive about saying yes to the buffet, or saying yes to something called a potluck, where we say, the goal is that we have a lovely dinner together. I want to make sure you have the options and choices that you need. So this is what I'm thinking about. Is there anything else I should create, or is there something that you would like to contribute? And all of us can see really, really simply that if all of us were together eating a casserole, not everyone could eat. Far more people would be able to eat if we had an option that was a buffet, especially one that we co-created. So one of the things that you're going to learn about universal design is it's a lens. It's a framework. It is a set of beliefs that we use as we design learning experiences for everyone. And there are 3 core beliefs of a UDL practitioner, and they are focused on these 3 things here: variability, firm goals, and expert learning. And again, there are a couple of tools and resources that you can use to learn a little bit more about this later. But when we design instruction, regardless of the age of the students that you teach, whether you work with young learners, whether you work with adult learners, whether you work with any learner, you have to recognize that variability is the rule, not the exception. We are unique. We are different from each other. That is beautiful. But each one of us is also incredibly dynamic and always changing. So variability means that we have all these learners who are different from each other, and their needs are always changing. And when we recognize that, we realize that one size fits all doesn't work. And so what we do is we say, what really is our goal? What are our very, very clear objectives? What is it that our learners have to know and do? And if we only did it in one way, like that casserole, who would be excluded? And then we start to say, what other pathways do we need? We work together and we collaborate, we ask our learners, and then we create these pathways and empower students, all learners, to become more expert in their learning, where they begin to think about which of these pathways do I need to take so that I can challenge myself, so I am supported, and so I can learn at high levels. So this is about how we recognize the barriers of design, think about our goals, and provide pathways that honor students as learners, because they need to think about how they are doing so that they can learn at high levels. Now, I have a little ebook here, which you can access in the resources. And I like to think sometimes of UDL as an academic exercise, like a game of would you rather. I'm a mom of 4, and my kids will say, Mom, if we could go on vacation, would you rather go somewhere where it's snowing, or would you rather go somewhere where it's very hot? And my kids ask all of these would you rather questions. But what we realize here is that, like, maybe a beach wouldn't work for everyone for vacation, or maybe snowy wouldn't work for everyone. And so we want to really embrace the variability and really think about the goal is to have an amazing time. And we say, like, which of these pathways would you like to take to have an amazing time? And we can do that in the classroom. And a lot of people think about universal design as being something that you have to, like, recreate every lesson. And I like to think of universally designed routines. So for example, many educators who work with students at many, many different levels will ask students to turn and talk. Now, what is the goal of turn and talk? There's actually 2. Sometimes we just want to provide an option for reflection. We want to provide time for thinking. And if that's the case, we have to recognize that it's very difficult for some students to arrange their thoughts into language and then speak to someone else. And so if the goal is really about reflection, we have to recognize that in order to reflect, some students really value being able to write down something or maybe just take some sketch notes, whereas other students absolutely love to reflect by having a conversation. If the goal truly is speaking, we really want to create a discussion, you have to recognize that some people cannot process that quickly. Multilingual learners will need more time to really think about the translation or to look at sentence stems. And so if we want all students to reflect, we can let them know. The purpose here is reflection. I want to give you time to really think about and to kind of summarize what you've learned. So would you rather do that by writing down kind of some main things that you remember, sketching some notes, or would you rather have a conversation with someone? Take a moment, think about what's best for you, and then we'll break off and we will reflect. If it needs to be, we're going to have a discussion, because sometimes in learning, it's really valuable for us to share our thoughts and listen to other people, and we're going to practice that. But I know that some of you might need a little bit more time to process, to review the questions, to really think about what you want to contribute. And so for those of you who are ready to go, you can start now. I'll put on a timer for 10 minutes. If you'd rather have a little bit more time to prepare, please do that. Now, that is a buffet, because what I've done is I've really thought about my purpose. I've thought about my goal. I've recognized my variability, and I've said, I want to honor you. Which of these is the best for you to reflect, to share? And the more that we can think about those practices, I can do this almost every single day. So when we're universally designing, we're recognizing that we want to embrace the very, very different lived experiences and the very, very different contexts of which learners come to us, and say, based on what you're doing right now, based on how you're feeling, based on this task, what is it that you need to reach this goal? And so it's so important that we're really thoughtful about what our goals actually are. Because a lot of people will think about universal design and they'll go, oh, I get it, it's just choices. Now, imagine for a moment that you came to my party and there was tuna noodle casserole, and I said to you, oh, I'm so happy you're here. Would you like the tuna noodle casserole in a red dish, or would you like it in a blue bowl? I've given you choice. I've universally said, no, I have not. I have not done that at all, because I didn't recognize and remove the barrier. That was not a choice that increases access. It is just simply a choice. And so we have to recognize that not all choices mean that we're leveraging UDL. Not all choices eliminate barriers, so students can have opportunities to be included and access learning experiences with their peers. So the first mistake that people make sometimes with UDL and choice is they give too much choice. So what you'll see is, if you look for this visual here in the resource document, there's this really great peer-reviewed article that answers the question, how much choice is too much choice? And the answer is 7. 7 is too much. But I don't even feel like we need to stretch to 7, because research is pretty clear that the best learning outcomes are actually after 2 to 4 really thoughtful, purposeful choices. So we're going to embrace the variability of the class. We're going to look at maybe something that is one size fits all, and we're going to say who would be excluded and what is a pathway that we could provide so that we are increasing inclusion, and what is necessary for some will be provided as a pathway to everyone. That is what is universal about the design, is that when we get to know that some of our learners face barriers, we can eliminate that barrier, but we want to empower every single learner to think about what is it that they need to learn at high levels. And so when we're thinking about providing options and choices, we want to recognize that it's not just about like producing a ton of choice for the sake of choice, but it's recognizing that when we know what learners have to know and do, we can back up and recognize that there are multiple pathways to do that. So construct relevance is simply that the pathways that we provide allow all learners to work towards the same firm goal. So there are two types of objectives or learning goals or standards. It's content and it's methods. Now I'm calling these standards, but it could be, again, course objectives or goals. But when we think about our hopes and our dreams for learners, it's about what students have to know or understand, and then what they have to be able to do. And when we want them to know, it's all about content. It's all about understanding, explaining, describing, summarizing. And when one of your goals is really focused on a learner building understanding, you can provide lots of choices for not only how they learn, but how they also share what they're learning. Because I can explain something with my words by talking. I can explain something by recording a video or a podcast. I could explain something using a combination of words and pictures in writing or multimedia presentation. The goal lends itself to lots of different choices, and I'll give you an example of this. However, sometimes we have some firm goals for students, like they have to accurately measure an angle, or they have to write, or they have to speak. And when we think about this, there's less flexibility. If students need to produce writing, they need to produce writing. And we're not going to say, oh, writing is hard, so you can just tell me. Writing is the goal. And so then I think about what prevents students from producing writing. Sometimes they struggle with organization. So there's going to be options for exemplars and graphic organizers and sentence stems. They struggle to produce writing quickly. So there's lots of opportunities for revision and getting feedback and peer conferences. They struggle to, maybe get their ideas out in a more traditional way, like typing or writing. So we, empower students and encourage all students to use assistive technology as available, augmented communication devices, because we ultimately want to allow students to produce writing in really authentic, meaningful ways. But the goal is writing. So what you'll see is that there's two very different types of goals. And sometimes it's helpful to actually think about your goals and think about, is this content? Is this methods? Is this one where it's actually pretty intertwined, of which I can still scaffold building the content knowledge before applying it in a specific methodology? So don't worry very much about the exact goals here, but just look at the verbs at the beginning, right? Students will communicate what they've learned about stars, or students will compare and contrast different pieces of artwork. But it doesn't say how, okay? Now, below it says students will measure using a protractor. That is pretty crystal clear. And it also says students will write text that is actually citing other text. So we need to spend a lot of time unpacking our goals and really thinking about what is mastery. So let's look a little bit more closely at that star one. If I want my students to communicate scientific ideas about stars and how they produce elements, I first need to talk to them about what is the success criteria. You're going to communicate all the different stages of the life cycle. You're going to communicate using, these target words, scientific vocabulary. You're going to make sure that you're citing evidence. And there's lots of different ways to learn about the life cycle of stars, from videos, from reading or listening to text, from small group instruction. But I want students to really think about, what's the best way for you to communicate? Would you rather communicate in writing? And again, handwriting your first draft, or maybe keyboarding, or maybe voice to text, but do you want to produce writing to communicate what you've learned? Or would you rather do a podcast? Now, again, we want students to meet the same criteria for success. We're going to use the same rubric. Mastery doesn't look different in a podcast than it does in writing. It's just, how do you want to communicate that? Maybe a nice interactive poster or a video. Now, this makes sense providing these choices. This on the next slide does not make sense, because if students have to produce writing and they have to use textual evidence in that writing, ultimately they have to compose writing. But we can compose writing voice to text. We can, compose writing with lots of assistive tech. And we start thinking about what are the options and choices that we provide so all students can produce writing. So always keep that in mind, that the firm goals drive the flexibility. It's multiple pathways to lead to the same destination. So we've talked about overall, like universal design for learning, when we know our goals well, when we are flexible about the pathways to reach those goals. We also need to empower our learners to be more self-aware and start thinking about what is the best way for me. And we also have to have this safety net of feedback, of targeted instruction, to help students really think about what is working well for them and what isn't yet. And we're going to address that through differentiated instruction. So I have provided you with a toolkit. It's called the self-direction rubric. And what's so interesting about this is you can actually see how self-direction develops and grows from very, very small children who are, in kindergarten, year 1, those are 4 and 5-year-olds, all the way up to our secondary learners. But I find it fascinating to look through all of them, even thinking about adult learners. Because when we're talking about expert learning, what we're really talking about is learners who are more self-directed. And self-direction is self-awareness, taking ownership about those decisions you're going to make, really thinking about strategically planning, really moving forward and actually trying to figure out okay, what works best for me? And then being reflective about what is successful, how do I know? And then ultimately thinking about how do I have to change my strategies? So as you dive in and you think about self-direction, it's so interesting to look at what it looks like and how it grows. Now, the reason I'm showing this to you is because this is the one for 4-year-olds. And sometimes I don't think I'm there. Because sometimes we work with our learners, adult learners, and we say, would you rather do it this way or would you rather do it this way? And it's emerging at an early childhood level of I want to do that one, without doing the cognitive work of what really is the task? What do I need to do, not only to show my strengths, but to recognize the areas where I need support in this context so I can take advantage of the tools and the resources that will help me to create something I'm incredibly proud of. So we have to support learners in really taking more time to be more thoughtful about the decisions that they're making. What are you going to choose? Why are you going to choose it? We also need to build in more reflection, which is, so how did that work for you? So at the end of a particular module or unit of study or week of instruction, we can provide options and choices to say, I want you to reflect on yourself as a learner. You can write it down. You can feel free to sketch some notes here. Again, video. There's so many different ways we can reflect, but make an artifact of that reflection and think about, what did you do really well and why? What were the strategies that you used? We can alter our own success, right? And then we can advocate for the things that we know we really need. What was missing this week? What do you wish you had done differently? And what are some areas that you want to grow? And even honoring that, because when I can articulate places I want to grow, I can remember that the next time I'm given an option. I might try something that's a little out of my comfort zone. I might ask for more support. I might ask for exemplars, but this is what we have to build into our classrooms. There's such a rush sometimes to just provide choices without thinking like a designer, a human-centered designer, which is just what really is the goal here and what would prevent people from meeting the goal and what flexibility can we provide? But then how do we honor the user and say, what is it that you need to do this well? And that allows us to design something that works for everyone. But then as we get formative assessments, as learners reflect, we can begin to differentiate instruction, which is we are responsive to what students need. So universal design is about students self-differentiating their own learning. And then we can pull small groups of students, small groups of learners aside and say, okay, I want to talk to you all about your use of this graphic organizer. I love that you started it off. I want to push you to the next level and thinking about being a little more complex, right? What I'm doing is I'm being responsive. I'm providing something different to a group of students based on what they chose and how they did. And so it brings everything together here, is that we want to make sure that we understand the importance of providing those options and choices for accessibility, for engagement, but also to give students opportunities to become more self-directed. We cannot do this work if we're not really, really focused on our goals. We have to be very careful not to overwhelm learners with choice. And then lastly, we have to be able to build up expert learning in our classroom by scaffolding, supporting, and providing feedback. So as I shared, this was pretty quick, but dive back into the resources, learn more about Universal Design for Learning. Feel free to go back into those discussion questions and really think about how this might change your practice. Now, at the very end here, I just want you to think about what was in the cards for you. So maybe you want to reflect on something that you feel after the short keynote, or what's something new that you learned. Or maybe it's like, that was a gem, I'm going to hold on to this. But maybe right now you're feeling spades, which means you want to dig into something more. You want to dig into a resource. You want to watch this again. You want to dig into a discussion. But please, whatever you do, just remember that we can create conditions that allow all learners to be successful, to build expert learning, and to feel honored and, of course, challenged and supported within inclusive learning spaces. So enjoy your conference. It has been a pleasure, and I hope you all have a beautiful day of learning.